Hello everyone and welcome to lecture 60. So, we are currently discussing the last topic for this course, which is price discrimination, and in the previous two lectures we have seen two types of price discrimination. One is known as the perfect price discrimination, or the case where the monopolist or the firm with market power extracts all of the consumer surplus. Then we talked about in our last lecture price discrimination based on observable characteristics, wherein based on some observable characteristics such as gender, age, income levels, the monopolist was able to divide consumers into two different groups, and within each group the monopolist practiced uniform pricing. So, this leaves us with the question, which is what happens if I am not able to divide consumers based on some characteristics, right. So, the monopolist does not know what is the age or the income level, or there are no observable characteristics by which the monopolist can divide consumers into different groups. Now, this is the study of what is known as second degree price discrimination, right. So, here the monopolist does not know which consumer belongs to which group, right, does not know which consumer. So, the monopolist knows that there are two groups, right. So, imagine that there are two groups of consumers. One is known as a high willingness to pay consumer or the high type consumers, right. So, this is the high willingness to pay consumers, and the next is an L type consumer, which is the low willingness to pay consumer. In the model of third degree price discrimination, I was able to divide consumers into the two different groups. Now, I know that there are these two groups, but I do not know which consumer belongs to which group, right. So, I will have to come up with a pricing scheme which will allow me to elicit the two true type of the consumer. So, the monopolist does not know which consumer belongs to which group. The consumers obviously know whether they are H type or L type. It is just that there is no distinguishing characteristic by which I can divide them, because if there were some observable characteristics, then I would have practiced third degree price discrimination. Okay. So, monopolist does not know which consumer belongs to which group, which means that there is no distinguishing, there is no specific distinguishing characteristic between the two groups. Right. And for the purposes of this discussion, it may even help in interpreting the Q as quality. I mean, we can still call Q to be quantity as before, but for this particular example, you can even interpret the Q to be quality, right, or even quantity as before. So, the question is, how do you practice price discrimination based on unobservable characteristics? So, let me first draw a picture. Let us understand this pictorially, and then we will take a specific example. So, imagine that I have the following. So, it will help for this discussion if we think of Q as quality, right. So, think of traveling in trains, the second tier AC coaches versus the non-air conditioned coaches, or if you are looking at airline travel, think of business class travel versus economy class travel, right. So, interpret Q. So, a higher Q will denote a higher quality, a lower Q will denote a lower quality, right. So, in our previous discussions, we had these two different demand curves. What I will do is, to understand this better, I will draw the two demand curves on the same graph. So, imagine that this is the H group, and let us say this is the L group, and let us assume for simplicity that the marginal cost continues to be 0, right. Let me also put in a few notations. Let me call this triangular area as A, this sort of parallelogram as B, and this triangular area as C, correct. Now, if the monopolist knew the willingness to pay of all the consumers, so let us say, suppose the monopolist knows the willingness to pay. Right? If the monopolist knows the willingness to pay of all consumers, well, what would it do? Well, this is for the L type, the lower one, the upper demand curve is for the H type. So, I would sell QL units and I will extract the entire consumer surplus from them, right. So, that would be if I would practice perfect price discrimination. In fact, in the extreme I could practice perfect price discrimination by charging A from type L consumers, A plus B plus C from type H consumers, right. So, monopolist knows the willingness to pay of consumers and also can see who is in which group, right, and also can practice, let us say, perfect price discrimination, right. Then I would charge a fee FL equal to A for the L type and I would charge a fee FH equal to A plus B plus C to the H type, right. Now, if I could for whatever reason not know or I could not practice perfect price discrimination, right. So, I knew that there were these two groups, correct, and I knew the demand curve across these two groups, but I did not know exactly within each group where someone was, right. So, I know the two demand curves, there are observable characteristics by which I can divide them. Now, notice if it was not observable, right. So, I would if I knew everything, this is what I would charge, right. So, essentially I would sell QH quality to the H type. So, interpret the QH as business class travel, which is a much higher quality compared to QL, which could be economy size travel, and therefore, the profit of the monopolist would be A plus B plus C plus A, which is 2A plus B plus C, and the consumer surplus for the L type would be 0, consumer surplus for the H type also would be 0, right. So, this is the case where if I could practice perfect price discrimination. But if the monopolist does not know the willingness to pay of consumers, then this pricing scheme will not work. So, let us make a note of that, right. If the monopolist did not know the willingness to pay of consumers, the above scheme will not work. Now, why will it not work? Well, think of it this way. So, now I do not know the willingness to pay of the consumers. Suppose I offer the following two schemes. Suppose I say I am going to charge FL equal to the area A and I will offer QL units. I will charge FH equal to A plus B plus C and I will offer QH units, right. Now, what is going to happen? The L type consumer is still going to choose this, right. That is not a problem. The L type consumer will get QL units and will pay a fee of A rupees. But the problem is for the H type consumers. So, recall these are the H type consumers, this is the L type consumer. The H type consumer, if he buys QL units at FL equal to A rupees, well, let us ask for these QL units, what is the willingness to pay of the H type consumer? Well, the willingness to pay is going to be this entire trapezoidal area. So, that is going to be A plus P. The willingness to pay is going to be A plus B, right. Based on the two demand curves, the willingness to pay for the H type consumer for QL units is going to be A plus B. If he pays A rupees, then his consumer surplus would be B. Whereas, if he were to buy QH units at A plus B plus C, his consumer surplus would be 0. Now, clearly B is greater than 0. So, the H type consumer also will end up buying the contract which is designed for the L type, right. He will end up, so H type will prefer to buy QL units at rupees A over buying QH units at A plus B plus C, because clearly buying these lesser quantity QL by paying A rupees gives the H type a consumer surplus which is greater than 0. in which case the profit of the monopolist now is simply going to be A rupees from the L type and A rupees from the H type. So, the profit is going to be 2A. Whereas, if I had known the exact willingness to pay of all the consumers, my profit would have been equal to 2A plus B plus C. Now, so the question is, what can the monopolist do? Can the monopolist do better, or can the monopolist get the consumers to what is known as buy the quantities or the qualities which is specifically designed for them? So, can I come up with two different quality types? One is a quality which I want to offer only the low type consumers, and one is a quality that I want to offer only to the H type consumers. Okay. So let me also get the picture again, so that I do not have to go back to the previous page. So, I will draw that again here. So, this is H type and this is L type. So, this is QL and this is QH, and as before I have A, B and C. So, one option for the monopolist is the following. Suppose, so what did I know? The source of the problem is that the H type consumer is getting a surplus of B rupees, right. So, if I offer QL units at a fee of A rupees, right, I will offer QL units or QL, a quality of QL at A rupees. The problem was that the H type was getting a surplus of B. So, if I design a second contract which is offering QH quality at A plus C, right. Now, think of what is happening. The L type is not going to choose this contract, right, because the maximum willingness to pay for the L type is A, and clearly he is not going to be interested in paying A plus C. The issue is, so the L type is clearly going to choose this. Let us check for the H type. Well, if the H type, if H chooses this contract which is getting a quality of QL and paying A rupees, then what is going to be his consumer surplus? Well, his consumer surplus is going to be B plus A minus A, which is going to be equal to B, right. His willingness to pay would have been this trapezoidal area minus what he would pay, that would leave him with B. On the other hand, if H were to choose QH by paying rupees A plus C, well, what would have been his willingness to pay for QH units? That would have been A plus B plus C. What he would pay is A plus C, that still leaves him with this surplus of B. So, his consumer surplus would have been B. So, he is indifferent between the two, and the second one gives him a higher quality. So, H type will choose QH at A plus C, right. So, now notice the profit of the monopolist is going to be A from the L type consumer, and then he is going to get A plus C from the H type consumer. So, he is going to get 2A plus C, which is clearly better than the profit of 2A that he was getting earlier, right. So, by offering two different such quality levels and making the type H consumer indifferent, right. So, I am telling that the type H consumer, if you choose the one which has QL quality, you are going to get a consumer surplus of B. If you choose a QH quality level which has a consumer surplus of B, you are essentially going to be indifferent. So, you are more, so the H type naturally will end up choosing the one which has a higher quality, and by doing so I am able to increase my profit as well, right. So, the L type consumer chooses QL quality level and gets a consumer surplus of 0. The H type consumer chooses a quality level of QH and gets a consumer surplus of B, and the profit of the monopolist is A plus 2A plus C, which is clearly better. The question is, can the monopolist do better? So, this was option 1, which is better than what I had earlier. Can the monopolist do even better? And the short answer is yes, and let us see how the monopolist can do even better. So, I will still get the H type demand curve here, the L type demand curve. This is QL and this is QH. Okay. Now, to think about this, let us suppose that I am decreasing, or rather let us suppose that I am decreasing the Q and I bring it to, let us say, QL dash, right. So, suppose the monopolist decreases I decrease the lower quality level, right. So, previously I was offering the quality level at QL for L type, the quality level QH for H type, and now I am decreasing the quality level from QL to, let us say, QL prime, decrease the lower quality from QL to QL prime, right, which means I have these two shaded areas. Let me shade one of them as this triangular area, okay. The other one is this trapezoidal area in blue, right. So, I decrease the QL to QL prime, and now let us define a few terms. So, let me call, so the previous big triangular area was A, okay. I am going to call this area minus the triangle to be A prime, right. So, my A prime is essentially the area A that I had earlier. So, this was the area A, the entire triangle, minus the shaded triangle, right. Or if you prefer, call this to be the new A, which is A prime, which is the old A minus the shaded triangle. Similarly, I am going to call this parallelogram, right, which was the old B minus this blue trapezoidal area to be B prime. So, I am going to call the new B area B. Recall what the B was this entire parallelogram. Now, I have removed this shaded area. So, the new B is going to be called as B prime, which is the old B minus the shaded trapezoid, right. And what was my area C? Well, my area C was essentially this triangular zone. I am going to call my new C to be C prime, which is this old C plus, so this entire area is going to be called as C prime plus the shaded trapezoid, right. So, I have decreased QL to QL prime and I am defining new terms for the areas A prime, B prime and C prime. So, A prime is the old A minus the shaded triangle, B prime is the old B minus the shaded trapezoid, and C prime is the old C plus the shaded trapezoid, okay. And I have reduced QL to QL prime as before, okay. Now, let us see what happens. So, suppose I offer QL prime units at a phi FL equal to A prime, right. So, I offer PL prime at A prime, which is essentially the area A minus the shaded triangle, okay. Now, what is going to happen? So, the L type, let us say, is going to buy this QL prime units, and I am going to extract A prime from the willingness to pay for the L type for these QL prime units is A prime. So, the consumer surplus for the L type is going to be exactly equal to 0. So, I am extracting all of the surplus from the L type, okay. Now, let us ask, if the H type were to choose this, well, if the H type were to choose this for the QL prime units, the H type's willingness to pay would have been A prime plus B prime, and the fee for these L prime units is A prime. So, the consumer surplus, so if H type were also to buy QL prime units, their willingness to pay would have been A prime plus B prime, they would pay A prime and the consumer surplus for the H type would be B prime, right. So, if I could somehow offer QH units, so if I offer QH units at FH equal to, so if I could come up with a pricing scheme which says that I will continue to give B prime as the consumer surplus to the H type, then clearly he would prefer QH units because that has a higher quality level and he gets the same surplus as he would have gotten if he had chosen the lower quality level. So, if I offer FH at, so I leave this B prime and in fact I charge A prime, right, at A prime plus rather A prime. So, I charge A prime which is this plus I offer C plus this area, right. So, I take away this entire amount, correct. So, I want to just give him B prime amount as the surplus, right. So, I essentially take the entire triangular area. So, let me write it carefully. So, I charge him this entire triangular portion which is A, right, and I charge him this C plus this trapezoidal area which is essentially C prime. Okay. So, essentially I charge him the triangular portion A plus this entire zone. Notice his willingness to pay for QH units is this entire big triangular zone. What he would pay is this amount A plus the C prime. And what is the C prime? The C prime is nothing but A plus the old C plus the trapezoidal area, correct. And you could also think of this as, so let me rewrite this without confusing you. So I charge him A plus the C prime which is the A plus the C plus the trapezoid. Okay. So, essentially what do I get? The profit of the monopolist then is, so let me call it as pi m hat, right. So, this is the fee. So, essentially I have Q L prime units at F L equal to A prime rupees and Q H prime or Q H units at a fee equal to A plus C plus this trapezoidal area. Okay. So, what is the profit of the monopolist? The profit of the monopolist is the A prime. So, ignore all costs. So, I take away A prime from the L type. Now, notice the H type is going to get the same surplus even with the second contract which is equal to B prime. So, he will continue to buy QH units. So, the profit of the monopolist is going to be A prime plus A plus C plus the shaded trapezoid. What is A prime? I already know A prime is essentially A minus the shaded triangle, right. So, that is A minus the shaded triangle plus A plus C plus the shaded trapezoid, which is essentially 2A plus C, right, 2A plus C plus I have the shaded triangle minus the shaded trapezoid minus the shaded triangle. Now, what was 2A plus C? 2A plus C was my profit earlier, where I was offering QH to H type at A plus C and QL to L type at A, right, which gave me a profit of 2A plus C. But now, by reducing the quality that I am offering to the L type, my new profit is 2A plus C plus the difference between the trapezoidal and the triangular area. Now, clearly the trapezoidal area is greater than the triangular area. You can notice that the blue shaded area is greater than the green triangular area. So, that means that this whole thing is positive. So, this whole expression is now greater than 2A plus C. So, what have we done? By reducing the quality that you are offering to the L type and choosing a pricing scheme which is going to make the H type indifferent between the two contracts, if you prefer, the monopolist is going to be able to increase his profit, which means that by reducing the quality offered to the L type the monopolist can increase her profit, can increase the profit, right. So, let us ask till what extent I can do. Can I do even better? Well, notice I can even move this further down here. So, the green triangular area will become slightly bigger. The trapezoidal area again will now, so I will keep reducing this QL prime further down and keep trying to compare the triangular area with the trapezoidal area. But think of these shifts as very small changes. So, even though it appears as a large gap between QL prime and QL, think of these as very small changes. So, think of QL being reduced by a very small amount or infinitesimally small amount. Okay. So, when the changes are small, they are essentially straight lines. Right. So, what I mean is that I could think of these changes to be very, very small, right. So, if the QL, so think of the QL being here and instead of QL prime being here, if the QL prime was somewhere here very, very close. So, essentially you are talking of a very, very small strip, right. So, that is the idea that I have in mind. So, let us draw it once more and you can see that we are going to make that argument to conclude which pricing scheme will maximize the profit. So, essentially we are asking to what extent can the monopolist decrease QL. So, as before I have this as the H type's willingness to pay, I have this as the L type's willingness to pay, and now notice, so this was originally QL, this was QH, I kept reducing it, right. So, very, very tiny amounts. So, I will further, so from this portion I will further bring it down here, right. So, to QL double prime. So, again I will compare now this triangular zone entirely with this trapezoidal area. So, you will notice that those areas are going to become, at some point the two areas are going to be equal, and instead of these pronounced changes, if I could think of very, very small changes, eventually I will have a zone where this gap, this delta and this delta will be the same, right. So, what I mean is that we would be making these small changes and this would be that area. So, at some point any of these further small changes are going to lead to areas being almost the same, right. So, I had QL prime, from QL prime I further reduced it, I asked by how much did the area below change, by how much did the area above change. Well, if it is still possible, I will move it further and find out this area versus this area. Notice now, note the two areas, the orange ones are coming to be almost the same, right. So, instead of taking these very pronounced changes, if I have these small deltas which are almost at a point in the limit trending to a point, then essentially these gaps are going to be straight lines. And I can offer the following interpretation. I can say that we can interpret the delta as the marginal cost, right, as the marginal cost, which is the fall in profit, because I am selling less to the L type, I am selling a lower quality to the L type, right. So, there is a fall in profit when QL falls, and this trapezoidal area earlier as the marginal benefit, which is the increase in profit, when QL falls, right. So, by offering a lower quality to the L type, essentially my profit from the L type is decreasing and there is the trapezoidal area which is and can be interpreted as an increase in profit when QL falls. So, optimality will require the marginal benefit being equal to marginal cost, right. So, just as previously we have seen marginal revenue equals marginal cost corresponds to profit maximization. Each time I decrease the QL, I ask what is, by offering a lower quality to the L type, I ask what is the marginal cost, that is going to be this shaded triangle. I ask what is the marginal benefit, that is the increase in profit. So, profit is maximized when marginal benefit is exactly equal to marginal cost, and let us say that occurs at some QL star here, right. So, at QL star, what I would do is I will charge A star, which is this entire area. So, essentially I will offer QL star units to the low type consumer and I will charge a fee which is equal to A star. The willingness to pay for these QL star units for the H type is going to be A star plus B star, let us say. So, the H type would get a surplus of B star from choosing this unit. So, what I will do is I will offer QH, call this as QH star if you like, as the other contract, and I will charge a fee so as to leave B star as the surplus for the H type. So, I will charge A star, let me call this to be D star, this area, and this area to be C star. So, essentially I will charge A star plus C star plus D star, right. So, what is going to be my profit? Well, my profit is going to be, I am going to get A star from the L type consumer and I am going to get A star plus C star plus D star from the L type, from the H type consumer. So, that is going to be 2 A star plus C star plus D star, right. So, this is going to be my profit, and by taking a simple example I will compute and show that by practicing this particular scheme I am able to do better, right. So, what is the main takeaway? The main takeaway is that when you compare with the case where the willingness to pay is observable, what you get is that to prevent the H type from lying, right, which is to choose the contract which is meant for the L type, the L type has to be made to suffer by offering him a much lower quality. Think of the stark difference in quality between the economy sized travel and business class travel in airlines, right. So, you are decreasing the L type to such a level so that the H type does not distort and misrepresent its true types, right. So, the QL star that you are offering is going to be much less than QL that you would have offered under full information. The QH star that you offer is exactly equal to QH. So, you are offering the higher quality for the H type, but for the low type you are offering a much lower quality. Finally, let me just go back to this example and quickly tell you how to compute. So, essentially if you look at the willingness to pay schedule, this would have been the high type, this would have been the low type. So, PH is 16 minus QH, PL is 12 minus QL. So, essentially what is my QH star? So, my pricing scheme is such that I choose a QL star which is here, so that this gap and this gap are the same, and I will offer QH star which is equal to 16 for the L type, for the H type rather, right. So, what is QL star? Well, this gap which is 12 minus QL star, right, because this is the L type's demand curve, this is the H type's demand curve. So, 12 minus QL star equal to this gap here. Well, what is this gap? This is 16 minus QL star minus, this point is 16 minus QL star minus 12 minus QL star. So, 12 minus QL star equals 4, 16 minus 12. I have a minus QL star plus QL star, so that vanishes. So, essentially QL star is going to be equal to 12 minus 4, which is equal to 8, right. So, this was 12. So, you offer a much lower quality to the L type. You essentially charge this area as A star, okay. So, that can easily be obtained by computing the area of this trapezoid. So, that is A star. And what do you charge the H type? The H type is charged A star plus D star plus C star, right. These are values that can very easily be obtained, right. So, I can compute this to be equal to 4, and you can check the A star value turns out to be equal to 1/2 times the sum of the parallel sides. So, 12 plus 4, which is 16, times 8. So, that is rupees 32. So, I offer 8 and rupees 32, which is chosen by the L type, and then I charge A star plus C star plus D star to the H type. I will let you numerically compute what the value of D star and C star are, right. So, this seems a little rushed, but think of what the main idea is. The main idea is that by offering what we call a menu of contracts, you are dividing the groups implicitly. You are allowing the L type to choose a much lower quality and the H type to choose a much higher quality. This completes the discussion that we had for this particular course. So, we have covered quite a bit of material all through the course. We started with a stylized example of demand and supply. We introduced the tools of price elasticity of demand and marginal analysis. Then we got into the demand side of the market, wherein we talked about the source of the demand curve, which is the utility maximizing behavior of the consumer. Then we talked about production functions, wherein we got into the cost minimization problem. Then we talked about the cost function and the cost curves. And then we moved to market structures, wherein we introduced perfect competition and monopoly. We also talked about welfare analysis. And finally, we are closing the course by talking about how a monopolist or a firm with market power can extract more and more consumer surplus from the consumers. So, I hope you find the material useful. I certainly enjoyed discussing this material with you. Prepare well for the exams, and I wish all of you the very best. Thank you very much.